Today I'm going to share my auto-include Necron units for 10th edition, and it's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. So I've played quite a few games now of 10th edition with the Necrons. I've been experimenting with all sorts of units, and now I can safely say I know what my auto-include units are. But what are they? The Hexmark Destroyer, the Doomsday Ark, the Transcendent Catan, or Lich Guard? Well, maybe it's none of them. I've played a lot of different styled lists in 10th edition. Fun lists, competitive lists, themed lists. I've really been experimenting. Now, one conclusion which I've come to is that themed lists aren't necessarily the way forward in terms of winning the games, because I've won most of my games except one themed list game, and that's when I played the Canoptic list at 1,000 points. Now, of course, anything can happen at 1,000 points, but that game really opened up my eyes to something which 10th edition is about, and that is the missions. 10th edition missions are really great. I'm really enjoying them. They're a lot of fun. I like the randomness of the cards that you draw, but they're not overly random that you can't really achieve them, or you might just get unlucky in a game. They're all fairly achievable, and if you can't achieve them one turn, well, maybe you can the next turn. I just feel that the way the missions work, the deployment maps, the way the objectives are, and the variety of missions that we have, I think they're great. Of course, you've got the primary objectives and the secondary objectives, and it was the secondary objectives that I learnt the most about when I played that themed list, because I found it really difficult to score them, and I realised that when you list build, you need to build for those secondaries. Destroying your opponent, of course, is great. We need to do that still. We still need Doomsday Arks and Locust Heavy Destroyers, stuff that can bring down your opponent. We also need a good amount of infantry primary objective scoring units, units which can stay on objectives and survive. A good spread of different types of units is always good. Some big guns, some survivable infantry, some fast units like flayed ones or tomb blades with scouts or infiltrate, and some distraction units. However, the units that are my auto-include units, well, they're there for something else. My auto-include units are there to score the harder to score secondary mission objectives, the points that potentially, if you don't score them, could lose you the game. So, what are these units? Let's take a look. Well, here they are, my auto-include Necron units. 5 death marks, 3 scarabs, and 3 scarabs. 210 points. I put these in my lists, whether I'm playing 1,000 points or 2,000 points. These are my auto-includes. Now, I'm not worried about the stats of these units. So, for example, Scarab Swarms, they can't score objectives. However, I don't care about that. They're not there for scoring objectives. They're there for other secondary cards. The same with death marks, really. I'm not worried about their stats. I mean, if they can kill a character, that's great. If they chip a few wounds off a character, that's great. But they're there to help me score secondary objectives. Of course, the scarabs can explode and do mortal wounds. The death marks can interrupt with your opponent's deep strikers. That's great. I'm not necessarily looking to pull that off, but if it deters my opponents from doing something, then yeah, that's great. As I said, these are here for different reasons. So, how are we going to use these units to get us some secondary points? Well, first of all, the 2 units of death marks are going to go in reserve. And then the 2 units of Scarab Swarms are going to deploy in the corners of your deployment zone. Now, there's only one table map where you can't do this, and that's the Search and Destroy, which is basically table quarters. So you're going to be able to deploy one unit in the corner, the other unit is going to be basically in the middle of the table. So you're going to have to spend a couple of turns probably moving the scarabs over into the corner, but ultimately the idea is to get these scarabs in the corners of your deployment zone. Now you may have to hold on to a card for a turn, but you may not. Obviously it's very random, but at least what we're doing here is setting ourselves up for the best opportunities to score these random cards. Now the first secondary objective which these units potentially could help you out with is engage in all fronts. So with 2 Scarab Swarm units in the corners of your deployment zone, basically you've got 2 quarters from the off, so you only have to get 1 unit into a third corner to start scoring points. You could use some death marks to deep strike them in if you need to, although you may have other units of course that can do that, but the scarabs are a good starting point. We then have investigate signals, which is where basically you have to do an action in the corners of the board, so that's within 9 inches of the corners of the board. So again, you've got your scarabs in those corners, that's 2 actions that you can do, and they're worth 2 points each. Now of course you could also deep strike the death marks in your opponent's corners as well, if you can get them in. Do the action, and again you've got more points. And of course don't forget, these cards can double up. You could potentially have an engage in all fronts and the investigate signals, so you can start doing double points with just these units. The death marks could also do deploy teleport homers, and again we're looking at doing it in your opponent's deployment zone. If you get behind enemy lines and deploy homers in the same turn, that's even better, and of course that's 5 points as well for doing that. Now next it's capture enemy outposts, which is basically get onto an objective in your opponent's deployment zone. A hard one to do. We do have other ways to get into our opponent's deployment zone, obviously with fast moving units or with maybe the Veil of Darkness, but the death marks, they have the potential to do this, to get in. And of course you can deep strike and maybe charge, and if your OC is more than your opponent, you could potentially steal the objective. Not necessarily the easiest one to get, but the death marks potentially have a chance of getting it. And as I said, you're hedging your bets that maybe you could do 1 or 2 of these cards in the same turns. I think it's a small investment for the potential of points that you could score with these units. Now if you didn't plan for these particular objective cards, well, you just might not score them, or you might end up holding the objective cards for too many turns, stopping you scoring other objective cards, because of course once you've scored a card, you dispose of it, you pick up another one, you've got more chance of scoring if you can score a card that turn. Now as well as you scoring points, these units have the potential to stop your opponent scoring points. So if you have your Scarab Swarms sort of deployed in the corners, it's going to make it much harder for your opponent to deep strike in those corners around your deployment zone, maybe stopping them from getting behind enemy lines. Area denial is really big in 10th edition. Now of course your opponent could target those scarabs. I mean, there's a lot of indirect fire these days, so even if your scarabs are hiding behind a piece of terrain, they could be targeted. But that's fine. If your opponent is targeting 3 lonely scarabs, then they're not targeting the rest of your army, and to be honest with you, I think you'll find you'll have plenty of other threats on the table that they'll want to deal with other than 3 scarabs, like right over there in the corner of your deployment zone. Don't think it's going to be an issue, but if they do shoot them, fair enough. They might even shoot and kill your death marks when they deep strike in, maybe overwatch them for example. Again, that's fine. I mean, it's a distraction unit, even if it just means they waste a CP shooting at your death marks. They are actually being active in the game. They're doing something for you. Now, of course, the death marks aren't just going to be able to take secondary objectives. You do have the option to take primary with them as well. If there's an open objective and maybe you've got different cards, you could potentially come down on a primary objective to help you score those points. I feel this set of units is very versatile, and as I said, these are my auto-include units. Now, yes, we've got a lot of other really good units. I've mentioned a few of them in this video, but maybe this video is just giving you a few other pointers of potential list building ideas. Let me know what you think in the comments box below. In the meantime, if you want to see these tactics in action, then here's a playlist to my battle reports, and here's a playlist to some of my other tactical videos.